So the AMD GPU that everybody has been waiting for finally has a face. This is the older version, the 6900 XT. Look at what has just been leaked. This is going to be the 7900 XT. We think there may be more than one version. We're going to talk about exactly what this picture means. This GPU is actually very important. Even if you're not an AMD fan, if you already have an RTX 4090, how good this AMD GPU is going to signify competition. It's going to see who else is doing good things in the GPU space. It's a very difficult area to be in. So we're going to analyze this picture. We're going to see what we can gather from it. I think you guys see the power connectors already. There's only two 8-pin and not NVIDIA's proprietary connection. Look here. This is a 3080 Ti, and even this, the Founders Edition, had a little proprietary connector here. This cable plugs into the 3080 Ti, the Founders Edition, and you need this in order for it to work at all. And then you plug this into a traditional 8-pin PCIe connector. Recently, the 4090, which has, of course, a slightly different connector than this, the 12-volt high-power connector, has been having loads of controversy because they've been melting. So AMD came out and said that their new 7900 XT is not going to use this sort of connector. There's probably nothing wrong with the standard itself of that connector, but apparently, according to Igor's Labs, and we covered this before on the channel, it looks like some of the adapters that NVIDIA actually provided to the third-party AIB partners just really wasn't constructed in the most optimal way, not the best quality. So when they bend and different things happen, you may have a lot of people with melting GPUs. And this actually is turning out to be a little bit bigger of an issue than we thought. A lot of posts are popping up, especially on like the Reddit NVIDIA group. If you take a look at that, you'll have various people with various situations popping up. So it's definitely not just one or two anymore. So that's important in relation to the new AMD GPUs. But at least looking at this GPU leak, that's the first thing that really catches my eye. Is going to be just the dual 8-pin power connectors, which signifies, if you read into it, a lot of things about this GPU. First, it's not going to be a crazy power monster like the RTX 4090, meaning that while I hesitate to use the word more efficient, because even if a 4090 is pulling 450 watts, it could technically still be pretty efficient depending on the performance that it's putting out. And we've seen that it does have some crazy performance. Definitely efficiency is a word that AMD likes to float around, and I bet you they're going to use that word when they're describing when this GPU comes out. That's going to be on November 3rd. They're going to announce the 7900 XT, we believe, and I think that's going to be something that they're really going to focus on. They're going to show you how their GPUs perform probably almost as good as a 4090 in traditional raster performance without ray tracing and using a lot less power, being more efficient. We have to remember also the picture here is going to be of sort of the reference edition. So here is the 6900 XT. This is going to be the reference edition. It's the one that AMD designs themselves. The third-party AIB models for the 6900 XT, many of them did have triple 8-pin connectors. So it certainly doesn't mean that all of the 7900 XTs will indeed just have dual 8-pin. I'm pretty sure that the third-party AIB models may be pushing some more power. They may add a triple, just like Power Color would do on like the Red Devil and GPUs like that. So that's definitely something very interesting, but still, AMD definitely looks like they want to stay at that 350 watts and lower for the TDP. So at least they can take some type of maybe the efficiency crown, maybe really make their GPUs seem like while they perform really well, they're definitely not sipping nearly as much power as the NVIDIA GPUs. And of course, they're just going to lash on to this issue about those melting adapters on the 4090, just to make a point on the RDNA 3, even if they never plan to use them anyway. This is something they said recently they're not using, and we know that these boards were probably designed months and months ago, so that was a decision that was just made a long time ago, and wasn't really necessary for the type of power that these boards are putting out. But once again, even the 4090 having that type of connector isn't really necessary. It's just a little bit of, space saving on the PCB itself. They can definitely put 3 or even 4 8-pin connectors, and that would work just fine. Maybe in the future for like a 4090 Ti, maybe something they decide to do if they can't figure out exactly how to make these adapters really safe. So let's continue to look at this GPU. Of course, this we're thinking is going to be the 7900 XT. It's going to be definitely pretty powerful. We're expecting a lot of performance gains. We can see that in terms of the design, it's a little bit bigger than this guy here, the 6900 XT. If we look at it from the side profile, aside from those dual 8-pin connectors, you can see that it certainly does look to be a little bit thicker. It's hard to tell from the picture, but it looks slightly thicker, or at least very, very close. I wouldn't expect this, at least the reference model, to be all that much bigger than the actual, reference 6900 XT. After all, the 4090 Founders Edition, it's kind of similar to the 3090 Ti, maybe a little bit different in some aspects. For the Founders Edition, where we really see the big difference are going to be the third-party AIB models. That's when you have something like this Asus TUF 4090, which is pretty massive, much bigger than the Founders Edition and any reference GPUs. So here we're comparing the reference AMD GPU to its own reference predecessor. So it's hard to say if third-party AIB models may indeed have thicker coolers. So we're going to have to judge just this particular design before we see other AIB GPUs. Where we really do see more of a pronounced difference, however, is going to be when we look at the top-down look at the fans. So here you can see that the 7900 XT, but that's what we're going to call it for now until we know exactly what it is, definitely seems to be a good deal taller than the 6900 XT reference edition. I mean, that's not too big of a deal here because these reference editions, and here once again I'm holding up the 6900 XT reference, they're not particularly big GPUs. Third-party GPUs, even like the Power Color Red Devil, those get considerably bigger. So to show the reference 7900 XT a little bit bigger, that's still probably smaller than some of the reference models we saw for the 6900 XT. So I don't really think that's much of a size difference at all, but we can definitely say it's bigger. And I guess we can look at the different design elements here. Now, if we look at it in terms of like the fan design, I count on both of these 9 blades. We know that the Founders Edition for the 4090 actually has some more blades than the 3090 Ti did. So there are very slight differences to those coolers, but at least here on the reference edition, even though the design is different, it doesn't have that R sort of in the middle. Possibly it could have on the production models. This is probably an early test type of cooler. Who knows what will change, but at least from the design, certainly some nice little design elements. I think it's definitely a lot curvier, much like some of the 4090 AIB GPUs like from Zotac that we saw when it first came out, but not as squared off, but it still has that Radeon in the middle. The fans do look a little bit different only in the middle part. The actual blades, once again, I counted about 9 blades, so that seems to be pretty equal across the board. Once again, if it only has a 350 watt TDP, I don't think you need too much bigger of a cooler, as even this 6900 XT here, this always ran really cool and never really had any problems. Very silent, ran pretty cool with this cooler. I'm sure it can handle definitely a lot more. I mean, look here, this is a 3080 Ti, and NVIDIA packs a lot of power. I mean, this has a pretty high TDP as well, and this is just basically like a 3080 cooler, and it's a lot thinner than the 6900 XT cooler is, at least for the the reference editions or the Founders editions. So definitely an interesting design. It's not as squared off, curvier at the edge there. Like we said, a little bit bigger. I think I like it. I think it's going to look pretty good. It's hard to glean other sort of improvements we may see just from that bigger size difference. But once again, I think even if they could keep the size smaller, it might almost be sort of a competition thing to see who can make the biggest GPUs. If AMD comes out with tiny little GPUs and they want to be high end, and a 4090 is compared against it, that may make it not really seem to be that great. Even if it performed or was more efficient and it performed really closely, for some reason people like seeing these big GPUs, even when it gives them a lot of headaches in terms of putting it in their cases. So at least here, if you buy a reference 7900 XT, you can expect more or less. If you have a current GPU that's of similar size, you shouldn't really have that many problems. The connector should be fine. Now that's for the reference edition, as compared to the 4090, which a lot of people have been having a lot of trouble fitting into their case because it's a lot taller, it's wider. Not only that, you have that really weird power adapter that hangs out the side, and people can't even close their case in a lot of different situations unless you have a massive case. A lot of people have taken to actually running the side panel open, so you get a little more airflow as a bonus, but mostly because if you close it, that cable may be right up against the glass, and we've seen all of the melting problems that have been potentially caused due to different bending of the cable. So people are definitely, very apprehensive to do that until some, 90-degree adapters like from Cable Mods eventually start to hit the market. So at least that's pretty good news here. And that would also indicate with that power limit, you're not going to need a different case like perhaps with the 4090. And of course, we're going to assume that most power supplies should also generally be okay. I mean, the 4090, even the AIB partners were recommending like 1,000 watts. I think MSI and ASUS said you may want 1,000 to 1,200 watt power supply if you have a very powerful CPU. Now, of course, NVIDIA will recommend about 850 watts for a Founders Edition 4090, but as you get into the AIB GPUs, that can definitely change as they can have power all the way up to 600 watts, some of these boards. Now, the 7900 XT definitely going to be rated for considerably less power, so most likely a reasonable power supply should do. The debate between NVIDIA and AMD, it's really a little bit tricky as the GPUs start to get more and more powerful and they're really trading blows even with ray tracing and traditional rasterization performance. A lot of people still do prefer NVIDIA if they're, for example, 3D artists, content creators. NVIDIA definitely has a lead there, machine learning in a lot of cases. But for the gamer market, that's when you can really start to see some, really great benefits with maybe an RDNA 3 GPU. If you're doing something like 1440p high refresh rate, 1080p high refresh rate, that's typically an area that AMD does really, really well. And of course, NVIDIA does very well with higher resolution, like the 4090 is an absolute beast of a GPU when you're doing 4K high refresh, especially when you start to put in ray tracing, where NVIDIA definitely has a pretty big lead as of now. Remember to stay subscribed. When these come out, we're definitely going to go over much more detail, compare them to what's available on NVIDIA, and of course, give you guys a lot of updates as what's going on the actual market situation, where you can actually buy them. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.